This is the lecture for Friedrich Hayek's The Use of Knowledge in Society. So first topic, he says, what is the problem we wish to solve when we try to construct a rational economic order? On certain familiar assumptions, the answer is simple enough. If we possess all the relevant information, if we can start out from a given system of preferences, and if we can command complete knowledge of available means, the problem which remains is purely one of logic. That is, the answer to the question of what is the best use of the available means is implicit in our assumptions. The conditions which the solution of this optimum problem must satisfy have been fully worked out and can be stated best in mathematical form. Put at their briefest, they are that the marginal rates of substitution between any two commodities or factors must be the same in all their different uses. So it's going to help if you can understand what that means. And if you haven't studied any economics, then probably you can't understand what that means. So first we need to explain this before we can get to the rest of the article. So we can mostly ignore the if stuff, although it helps to understand that stuff, but not really. Mostly we want to think about this solution. So the marginal rates of substitution between any two commodities or factors must be the same in all their different uses. And this is a sort of proposed solution to the problem of trying to construct a rational economic order. So basically what this solution is saying, when we're talking about the marginal rates of substitution between any two commodities or factors, we're saying like, basically what would you get if you did something else with a given commodity or with a given sort of productive factor or something. Specifically, like what if you swapped two things? Like, what if, yeah, so sorry, an example would be good. So what if I'm making a car and the wheels are made of rubber, but instead of making the wheels of rubber, I could make them out of potatoes. uh, you know, what would happen if I swapped out rubber versus potatoes? And I think you know what would happen. It would be a disaster. My car would be very bad. So what I should do probably is use the rubber for the car and use the potatoes for something else. Maybe use the potatoes for breakfast. And so the thought is the use I'm getting out of the rubber, I can attach like a number to it to measure like how helpful it is in terms of satisfying my preferences. Let's say it's doing a 10. You know, I get a 10 out of using rubber in my car, and I would get a -4 out of using potatoes in my car. Similarly, let's say that by using potatoes in my breakfast, I get a 10 out of using the potatoes in my breakfast, and I would get -4 out of using them in the car. So you know, the potatoes seem to be doing well in their job of breakfast, and the rubber is doing pretty well in the job of being the wheels of my car. And so what does it mean to say that the marginal rates of substitution between any two commodities or factors must be the same in all their different uses? Basically, we've gotten to the point where we can't swap anything for anything. We can't sort of change what's being used in any way, uh, in a way that makes things better. Namely, when the marginal rate of substitution is the same in all their different uses, basically, like whatever I'm using rubber for, I can't get anything more out of rubber than what I'm using it for right now. So maybe I'm getting a 10 out of using my rubber for wheels in my car. Maybe I could get a 10 if I used rubber for something else, but I can't get more than 10 out of my rubber. And let's say I'm getting 10 out of using potatoes for breakfast. Maybe I could use a 10 out of using them for dinner, but I can't get more than 10 by using my potatoes for anything else. And so the idea is if we just get like all of our like everything in the economy is doing that, like everything in the economy is being put to its most preference satisfying use. It's sort of we're getting the most out of it that we could get in terms of what we want. Then we're done. You know, that's the economy. That's the best economy. Nothing is being underutilized is basically the goal here. If something is being underutilized, we could substitute it, and then we it wouldn't be sort of the same as what we're using it for right now. It would be getting more. And so we want everything to be doing as, we're getting as much out of everything as we can. So that's a proposed solution to how the economy should be organized. The ideal economy is one where we're getting sort of the most out of every factor or the most out of every commodity. And we couldn't do better than this. That sounds good. And so the rest of this section 1 and section 2 and is why that's not the answer. But it sounds like a good answer on the surface, so that's interesting. Another point. So on page 521 to 22, he sort of says, he says, he doesn't sort of say, he says clearly, it is almost heresy to suggest that scientific knowledge is not the sum of all knowledge. But a little reflection will show that there is beyond question a body of very important but unorganized knowledge, which cannot possibly be called scientific in the sense of knowledge of general rules. The knowledge of the particular circumstances of time and place. It's with respect to this that practically every individual has some advantage over all others, blah, 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 blah. So that's an interesting point that he's making here about how science can only, like, if you understand scientific knowledge as sort of knowledge of general rules, like science is coming up with scientific theories about how things work. And that's not going to include knowledge of particular circumstances of time and place. And this knowledge of particular circumstances of time and place turns out to be actually very, very important for the point he's making in this article. So that's interesting. But like the broader point about scientific knowledge is not the sum of all knowledge, that's actually a pretty important point sort of outside of this article too. Because what it means is that science sort of cannot answer every question you might have. Like science can't sort of know everything. And I'm not sure if you're at all inclined to think that science could answer every question, but so maybe maybe this is a waste of time in the lecture because nobody is tempted by this view. But like there are people in the world, and you may be one of them, who think, no, in principle, science could answer every conceivable question you could have. Like, obviously right now, science can't answer every question. That's ridiculous. There's tons of stuff we don't know, even about science, let alone about anything that science can't answer. But like, in principle, maybe any question you have, there is a scientific answer to it. And Hayek is pointing out one example of the way in which this is simply false. No, science doesn't have an answer to everything. It has an answer to every scientific question, but some questions are sort of not questions science can answer. So, for instance, what should you have for breakfast, if anything? Science can like give you a lot of helpful information. Maybe nutrition science can tell you all the relevant information about nutrition. Maybe psychology can tell you all the relevant information about like how much you're going to enjoy certain things. But like science can't answer what you should have for breakfast every day. Why? Well, lots and lots of reasons. Number one, what's available to you is going to depend on where you are. So you can't just have anything for breakfast. You have a limited range of options, and science sort of can't analyze all of those options. Like science as an endeavor is scientists doing research on stuff. Nobody has the time or the willpower or the money to, investigate your breakfast every day. And even if they could, it would be too late. By the time they've sort of gone through peer review and published an article on what you should eat for breakfast, it will be many months later. So science can't answer that question today, and it can't answer it tomorrow. And there's just many, many questions that science can't answer, sort of in principle or in practice. And so that just, if you are inclined to think that like in principle science could answer everything, it's interesting to realize no. Hayek gives one example here, but there's many more. So that's just fun. And then finally, not finally, but next. So why are we reading this article? So we're in the capitalism unit now. And so one reason we're reading this is that its main point is an economic one about, what's the problem we're trying to solve when we construct a rational economic order, and what is this, and how do we solve this problem? And so broadly, that's not, even that alone is not merely an economic one. When you turn it into this, it is merely an economic one. But Hayek, as he explains in the article, he thinks this is actually not, you can't do this. So this is not like merely an economic article, but it is largely an economic article. And we're not like, this is not an economics class. We're not studying capitalism from an economics point of view, but capitalism is an economic system. Like it's a system of organizing economies, and it is a rational. It is one sort of solution to the problem of trying to construct a rational economic order. And so we can't look at capitalism in isolation from economics. We are going to talk about economics in certain circumstances, and so this is introducing some economics that will help us think about capitalism. So that's one reason we're reading it, for economics background. Second, we're reading it because there's just some interesting stuff in here, and so we can think about and talk about that stuff. And that is what parts 4 and 5 of the lecture are going to be. And then third, it does make one philosophical point about capitalism, which will be a very important point for us. And so that's a third thing to get out of this article. So moving now to sort of the second thing to get out of the article, we're skipping the economic stuff because you'll just get that when you read it. But now sort of the miscellaneous stuff to pay attention to when you read the article. This is not the only interesting stuff, but this is some stuff to maybe think about and talk about and write about on perusal. So one way of understanding sort of his main argument here in the article is a sort of economic approach to the importance of kind of getting different perspectives. And we've seen the idea of getting different perspectives quite a bit in this class. And, I realized I left even another name off the list that should have been there. So this has come up all over. The earliest I think we saw was Sen's article, where his proposed idea of justice was you want to bring in like lots of perspectives, including the sort of ideal observer, uninterested in the society stuff. So we saw it in Sen. We saw it in Anderson, who had this conception of deliberative democracy, where the idea is you want all these different sort of perspectives mixing in society. We saw this very clearly in Young, where part of what we need in identity politics is these different voices, and this was echoed in Perec. And then in maybe no, that's enough names. Sorry, up through Perec, maybe some other people we've seen have talked about deliberative democracy and different perspectives. There's maybe a bit of this in Taylor, maybe a bit of it in Bedkart. I don't know. But then this came up also. I think I explicitly mentioned this in the lectures, but if not, it came up in the articles for written by Manoharan and Tanda. So it's interesting to think about like all these different views about the importance of different perspectives in light of what Hayek is saying here when he's making his economic point. So once you read the article and once you understand the economic point, maybe think about that. A second point is, I didn't put the page number, but one of the things he talks about in the article is this sort of idea of like a planned economy and what a planned economy has to do in order to accommodate change, and what unplanned economies have to do in order to accommodate change. And it's worth thinking about that in light of a similar kind of point, a different point, but a similar kind of point that we saw in Nozick. So if you recall, Nozick said, if you have the sort of like pattern of justice that you think society should match, like if you're Rawls or something and you think society should give everybody equal rights and then distribute resources equally unless inequality would be to the benefit of the worst off. If you have some sort of favorite pattern of justice, freedom is going to upset that pattern. So this is the Wilt Chamberlain example. Imagine you sort of implement your pattern in society, and then everybody decides to pay extra money to Wilt Chamberlain to watch him play basketball. Now the pattern has been upset. And how are you going to fix this? Well, are you going to take it all away from Wilt Chamberlain and give it back to the people every week or something? Like, it's going to be a mess, Nozick thinks. he thinks personal freedom is going to completely destroy any pattern you have unless you restrict personal freedom and keep people in line. But this is not the point Hayek is making. Hayek's point about plans versus change is different. But maybe there are things in common between these two. I don't know. Think about it, maybe not. Finally, the sort of third reason we're reading this article, sort of a point about capitalism. He thinks the way capitalism solves the question that he has asked in the first sentence of the article, he thinks the way it has solved it and the thing it does to solve it is a marvel. He calls it, this is enough of a marvel. And then he says, I've deliberately used the word marvel to shock the reader out of complacency with which we often take for granted the working of this mechanism, with which we often take the working of this mechanism for granted. He thinks this thing that he's going to describe to you in the article is actually like really, really impressive. It's like amazing that capitalism does this. And it's like, we shouldn't take it for granted. We should like really take seriously how crazy this is, how cool this is. And this impressive feature of capitalism, he is coming at it from an economic point of view, but you could also come at it from a political philosophy point of view, which is to say, not just that this is like economically very impressive, but that morally this is very impressive. Like this is what makes capitalism not just like a neat trick, but also like the way we should organize our economy, or this is one of the reasons why capitalism is the way we should organize our economy. And so this is kind of an argument for capitalism. He doesn't quite go that far in this article, really, because as he describes it, like I don't know, the main component of this marvel is like the pricing system. And he says, like even Leon Trotsky argues that economic accounting is unthinkable without market relations or whatever. Like the way he puts it, like, maybe socialism can also adapt this marvel. Maybe socialism can put this marvel to work. Whether or not socialism can do this is sort of a point of contention. Like he talks about here, maybe the socialists have accepted this point. And so maybe this doesn't really help us figure out capitalism versus socialism. But we are going to see a socialist who doesn't know about this, who is less clear about whether socialism can adapt this marvel for itself, or in fact, the better way to put it is that the socialist will say, I don't think socialism wants this marvel. Socialism has to solve the problem a different way. That at least is going to be Cohen's view. And we'll also see Arneson talk about this in the context of Cohen. So this is to give you a preview of one thing that maybe the capitalism versus socialism fight can be about. Hayek doesn't frame it that way, but we could potentially frame it that way. We'll get the reasons for framing it that way mostly when we read Cohen, and especially when we read Arneson discussing Cohen, which is our last reading, so it's not for a little while. But this is, just a preview of that. And also just pay attention to the marvel of capitalism, both for political philosophical reasons, but also for just economics reasons. Just understanding it is a nice thing to understand.